Okay, we've been given the thumbs up. So welcome to everybody, and welcome to this event, which will cover the development of country platforms for enhanced climate and development action. So that's an important piece of work by the MDBs over the past year, which takes account of MDB reform work. You know, there's been a lot of discussion on that, and also responds to the calls for MDBs to scale up their climate action and finance. That was an outcome of COP27. So this, in a way, is a kind of a event, super event in the sense that we have, I believe, 8 MDBs that will be talking. We'll have presentations. We'll have lots of content. And I think we have 87 or 86 minutes to do this. So because of this time element, I will turn immediately by introducing Dr. Zamir Iqbal, who is the Vice President Finance and CFO of the Islamic Development Bank. And among his many responsibilities, Dr. Iqbal has led the inaugural Islamic Development Bank Green Bond and the subsequent Sustainability Bond. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the important role that the Islamic Development Bank has played over the past 6 months as the coordinator of the MDB group. And one of the outputs is what we're going to be covering today together. So, Dr. Gibal, lectern is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of multilateral development banks, I'm honored to be here today to deliver the opening remarks on the role of country-led platforms in urgently addressing the challenges posed by climate change. As you know, climate change is a global threat that requires collective action and coordination among all the stakeholders, especially in the developing countries that are the most vulnerable to its impacts. Country platforms are innovative and effective way of aligning the support of multilateral development banks or MDBs with the national priorities and plans for our partner countries. They provide a platform for dialogue, collaboration, and harmonization among the MDBs and other development partners, as well as with the governments, the private sector, and the civil society. They aim to deliver more and better development finance while reducing the transaction cost and enhancing ownership and accountability. Country-led platforms can also be key instruments for advancing the global climate agenda and supporting the implementation of Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. They help to mobilize and scale up climate finance, promote low carbon and climate resilient development, and foster knowledge sharing innovation. They can also contribute to the global efforts to achieve net zero emission by 2050 and to adapt the changing climate. MDBs are a major provider of climate finance in low and middle income countries. MDBs play a vital role in supporting the development goals of their clients, especially in the context of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Paris Agreement on Climate Change. However, the current landscape of development and climate finance is complex and fragmented with multiple actors, instruments, and modalities, hence the need for the coordination and harmonized coordination mechanism among the MDBs. Now, MDBs, country sector platforms, are not a one size fit all solution, but rather flexible, and context-specific tool that can be adopted to the specific needs and preferences of each country and sector. They can cover a range of sectors and themes such as infrastructure, energy, health, education, agriculture, environment, and social protection. They can also involve different types and levels of collaboration, from information sharing and joint analysis to joint programming and financing to joint implementation and monitoring. Today, we will hear from some of the countries that have established or are in the process of establishing country platforms. In addition, we will learn from MDBs that have engaged and worked with countries in supporting such platforms. We will learn from the experiences, challenges, and opportunities and explore how we can further enhance the effectiveness and impact of these platforms. We will also discuss how we can strengthen the coordination and collaboration among MDBs and other development partners, and how we can leverage the synergies and complementarities of our respective mandates. Ladies and gentlemen, country sector platforms are a promising and innovative approach to address the climate crisis at scale and achieve our common vision of a sustainable and prosperous future for all. They are also a concrete and practical way to operationalize the principles and the spirit of Paris Agreement and demonstrate our collective and individual commitment to climate. I invite you all to join us in this endeavor and to share our experiences, insights, and suggestions on what MDB's country platform could look like, as well as the success factors. I look forward to a fruitful and constructive discussion with you and to continue a strengthened collaboration with you in the future. I thank you for your kind participation, and my special thanks to distinguished panelists who took the time from their busy schedules to be with us here today for this very important topic. Thank you once again, and I look forward to the rich discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iba. And now we will move to presentations. So two presentations, they will be made in two parts. So the first part will provide a brief summary of the joint climate work of the MDBs and results. And it will be presented by Elina Royen, who's the Department Director for Operation Support and Climate in the Operations Directorate of the EIB, the European Investment Bank. And in this position, Elina is driving the mainstreaming of green financing in EIB and making it an integral part of its value proposition. So, Elina, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joshua. And let me first start by saying that I'm very excited to be part of today's event and represent EIB amongst the fellow MDBs. So, as Joshua said, in the next few slides, we will showcase you the past before we move on to the present and explain more our initiative on the country-led platforms. So where did this all start? First of all, over the decade ago, at the phase of the climate crisis, the MDBs came together and had the need to share knowledge and information amongst each other, and in particular, the first work streams that came live were around tracking and reporting, transparency, and as the work progressed, we went well beyond knowledge sharing and coordination and tracking and reporting. We worked together around the dual challenge of nature and biodiversity, and that work continues. We also came up with the common principles for Paris alignment, and now we're working on the operationalization of those principles. And of course, we have been working together jointly on efforts to mobilize more climate finance and on greening of financial systems, and in particular focus on mobilizing private capital for climate. So that brings me to the next slide and some of the quantitative achievements, if you will. I would like to here pass on really three key messages. First of all, we are already achieving our joint set climate finance targets ahead of the time of 2025. At the same time, we have been able to mobilize private financing with the considerable scale. And thirdly, I would like to point out that as we are financing financing climate mitigation investment, we are also have been able to significantly jointly ramp up adaptation financing, which of course remains as a key challenge going forward. Now I would like to pivot back to the Paris alignment and those Paris alignment principles that we have jointly agreed upon. We have been working along the six building blocks around the Paris alignment frame. On the building block 1 and 2, the focus has been on considering the operationalization challenges of the Paris alignment principles at the institutional level. The promotion of transparency and accountability on Paris alignment has been high on the agenda. And we have also been considering how we can actually walk the talk, how our institutions themselves can align their activities with Paris. And of course, the scaling up of climate finance along the low carbon pathways has been a top priority, and indeed helping the countries to develop and enhance their climate policies and support the systemic implementation of those goals. And that brings me to my final slide and a bit of a deep dive on the topic of country level action and systemic change. Here, the MDBs have a track record already in supporting the country level LTC implementation. And again, I would like to leave you with three key messages here. First, the actions around the LTC support have been global, as you can see. At the same time, we have been acting globally. So the actions have been translated to a very significant number of individual engagements at the local level. And then thirdly, these engagements have covered activities from upstream policy work to midstream project development and also downstream activities at the project level. And I think this work that we have done really underpins the recognition that there is a need to prompt system change, do collaboration, cooperation, and partnerships. And with that note, I actually would like to hand over to Sulhang, who will now dive deeper into the topic of country platforms.
So thank you very much, Elina. So I hope everybody that the reason this little presentation was made was to show what we're building on, what the MDBs are building on, that this is not in a way what Sunga is going to present, is not a de novo, something that's invented, but it's something that builds, on a lot of work. And I think your last slide was particularly illustrative. So Sungha has a very long title, which I need to tell you about. She's the Associate Director and Head of Green Policy and Analytics at the EBRD. As such, she deals with a lot of the issues that were in the last slide. But now we turn to you to hear more about this famous country platform approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we have the slides? Yes, the next. Yes. So, yeah. Last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, it was the first time that the COP decision specifically mentioned MDB, calling on them to act. What it asked for is MDBs to define a new vision and commensurate operational model, channels, and instruments that will substantially increase climate finance. This notion of MDB's role in mobilizing finance, and not in the billions, but really in the trillions, was captured in the independent high-level expert group report on finance for climate action, known also as the Songwei and Stern report. And also there have been many subsequent high-level announcements, including the G7 and G20, on how MDB's role is very important in terms of scaling climate finance. Sorry, didn't realize I have the clicker here. In response to these calls, so MDBs have been working together to develop a new country sector platform, which is shifting from the individual project finance approach to programmatic approach to really achieve the systemic and transformational change. Specifically, it aims to first enhance the climate ambition of the country, which provides a strong political commitment and the signal to the market that provides the grounds for the wide cooperation among the stakeholders. Secondly, it's about accelerating the identification of projects and investment needs. This process needs to be informed by various technical assessments, including transition pathways, country diagnostics, analysis of their policy and legal framework, but also active stakeholder engagement. And this identified project and investment needs need to be captured by a country-owned investment and financial plan. Third, it aims to mobilize finance from both the public and private sector through improved access to concessional financing and project preparation and implementation support, which then leads to reduction of the transaction costs and cost of capital in general. And last but not least, it's about enhancing the transparency and accountability. And this is through tracking and reporting on measurable progress, including the overall impact of the collaboration and system transformation. So what does it take to develop and implement a country sector platform? First, the country really needs to define the outlines of the platform. This means that the country needs to first be able to connect with its overall climate goals as reflected and captured in the NDC and long-term strategy, but also set out the ambitious measurable targets it wants to achieve. It also needs to elaborate the links between climate and development action and its co-benefits. The platform also needs to outline what is the aggregate climate investment pool. So combine public, private, and concessional finance. But the overall ambition, the financial ambition, needs to also be outlined. And the cross-cutting elements needs to be integrated. What I mean by that is, for example, just transition, nature, and private sector participation. That needs to be reflected into the output and outcomes that the platform aims to achieve. And MDBs, once that outline is sketched out, essentially MDBs can support the country in breathing life into this design by providing the different types of activities, as mentioned before, whether it's technical analysis to mobilization of finance and facilitating the stakeholder engagement. MDBs can either join forces and collaborate in carrying out those activities, or divide up the role depending on the country context, but to deliver in a resource optimal way. What is really essential is, of course, the country ownership, as mentioned. It goes beyond the ownership. It's about leadership, meaning that the platform needs to weather through the changes of government, which can be quite challenging in the context that MDBs operate in. It's also, the country needs to be but needs to make the public aware of what the co-benefits of the platform should be. Beyond climate action, what is the actual developmental, tangible benefits that the public can feel? It's about making the coordination happen at a country level, and defining the range and the roles of the participants who will be part of this platform. And then last but not least, the country needs to aim in parallel to develop the appropriate local capacity so that the platform has more long-term sustainability. Last but not least, I think what is most important is the ultimate impact that we are trying to achieve. It's kind of illustration of the year of change here, but I mean, what I want to bring your focus to is really the last point, is that through the platform approach, what we're trying to do is accelerate the transition to Paris-aligned, country-driven just transition into a competitive, resilient future economy for the countries that we are supporting. So on this note, I will pass on to the panel discussion, where the panelists can further share some more examples on the different components that they are working on, and how we can work together. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Sunga. And I think the reference now to the next part, we will have two panels because of the extent of material that we would like to share with you. It really relates to that little brush with the paints, right? And what we're going to try to do is to go through the color palette, and describe to you the work that is done in some of these different elements. So the first element is one that is very important at the beginning, which is good analytics and understanding, what the issues are. Because as you all know, in this room, the issues are not easy, right? And they require, a lot of work. So for that, we have Raoul Kitchlu, who is the practice manager in the World Bank Climate Change Group. And in this position, Raoul, if I understand, you lead the team that is, in a way, mainstreaming climate action across the World Bank lending operation. And that's quite a job, right? So I think the question to you is really to ask, how can CCDRs, right? You can explain what the acronym is for those that don't know, but I'm pretty sure that everybody here knows what they are. But to which extent, are they being used, or can they be used to inform country platforms? And how do you work with other MDBs in this process? Rahul.
Thank you, Chief. I think a super panel needs a super host. So, Joseph, I think grateful for the invitation. Very nice to see so many new and old friends in the room, especially those of you who braved the long lines in the heat today. And I think what I would start by saying is transformational impact or good outcomes on climate and development really need the scale and speed and the urgency that the challenge requires. Dr. Iqbal started talking about the fragmentation. I think the time for siloed approaches on, climate and development separately, climate and nature, climate and water, climate and health, we need to put it all together to really have meaningful impact, because these issues are so intertwined that you cannot cherry pick on issues altogether. I think the partnerships, the platforms, the real value proposition is that aggregation, is that scale mentality, is bringing all of our expertise, our financing behind the countries, and to be able to reimagine our approach on the ground in each of these countries that we are operating in. So I think with the goal being very clear that we want to be able to have truly better outcomes on low emission and resilient pathways that support the country's development. The question is that you begin that journey with some clear direction, with some clear mapping of where you're ending, what the issues are, what the alternatives are, and what type of engagement each one of us can support. So I think I'll talk about three things: what CCDRs are, how do we develop them collaboratively, and what can they be used for. So on the first side, what CCDRs are, is what Sunga very nicely put, is that they are a connection piece between the challenges that are so multifactorial, global and local in nature. And so we're really trying to resolve this from a very rigorous analytical upstream manner to answer questions around what are the impacts and risks to a country for climate change across its economy. What are the poverty impacts? What are the distributional impacts? What are the impacts to this infrastructure? What happens to its export industry? What happens to communities, health systems in that environment? Those issues perhaps already are difficult to address at a sectoral level, but then to model that across an economy and to look at the trade-offs and interdependencies in that macro setup is really complex exercise, requires a lot of data, requires a lot of minute understanding of equilibrium computational systems, which has to be developed collaboratively across all of our expertise. I think the same token, looking at the costs and opportunities on the decarbonization pathways, whether it's in the energy sector, transport sector, industries, how can the country truly achieve net zero pathways, is something that is at the heart of developing a successful country climate and development report. We've done about 45 of them, and another set of about 15 to 20 are in the works. And the goal is to cover basically all of our client countries globally. Second part is how do we actually develop them and provide the right set of tools and options to the country in order to look at various policy and investment opportunities that there are. I think in terms of the building blocks of information that goes into this one report, I think the last time that we had done a stock take is about 200 staff of the World Bank work on each single report. In addition to all of the collaborations with academia, with MDBs, with the country, with the civil society, private sector that are part of this journey. And that collaboration at the input level is multi-dimensional. It can be at data levels. It can be looking at scenarios. If the country achieves targets here, what are the various different scenarios that can be considered? What are the trade-offs between those scenarios? We work very closely with IMF on some of the macro data and analysis and the financial system issues that they are working on. We work with our colleagues who may have expertise in a particular sector, have done rigorous analysis, and that can be used as input into a lot of these tools that are designed. And I think we've seen very successful partnerships at the ground level from this standpoint. In countries where we have country platforms either already underway or in the works, Bangladesh, Egypt, many other countries where it really can provide that collaborative platform. Finally, as I said, what are the outcomes and how this can really be used? The outcomes of the CCDRs can be used to facilitate greater action and better organization and coordination, is that it simply provides not just challenges and opportunities, but recommendations on the policy engagement package that may be necessary to enact a successful ecosystem for public and private sector investments to come in. At the same time, it also identifies investment plans that are necessary, whether it's on the resilience pathways or decarbonization pathways for the country, which is absolutely key for all of us to rally behind as well. It's not only the knowledge and the technical assistance and expertise, but the financing. Which sectors should it be directed to? How much is the quantum? And the idea really is to mobilize resources from a wide set of buckets, whether it's domestic resources, MDB resources, looking at concessionality, looking at opportunities for repurposing subsidies, carbon markets, concessional resources that may be available. So it's really, the idea is to provide the upstream analytics, help coordinate all of our respective capabilities, and rally behind the country in a predictable long-term policy reform and investment platform that is the value proposition for CCDRs.
Great. Thank you very much, Rahul. And I think one very important outcome also of this work is this notion of priority, because countries confront a lot of issues. They have to do a lot of very difficult assessment, trade-off. They can't afford everything, and I think CCDR is also very useful in that, in the sense of giving a sense of that priority. So, having this first piece, right, the upstream, let's move to say maybe the next color on the palette that you saw on the slide, which is really a key element of this platform, is really what is sometimes referred to as country ambition, or the formulation of the goals. What are the objectives that are being pursued by the platform? And therefore I'd like to turn to Giampiero Nastri, who is the Director of Sustainable Business and Infrastructure at the EBRD, because he has been working with a number of countries precisely on that particular question. So, Giampiero, if you could share with us a bit, what do you do? How do you use that? How do you say painting brush?
Thank you, Gabriel. I'm really delighted to be here with all of you. Good afternoon. I would like to share a bit the experience of the BRD in this journey. We are at the beginning of a process in developing, supporting countries where we operate, developing and implement this country platform. I'll try also to be a bit specific, give examples, so to give a bit of color to the work we're all doing. A lot has been said by Sangha, by Elina, by Rahul. So I'll try to bring some elements of our experience in cooperation with partners, for example, in the development of the supporting Egypt, developing their energy pillar in the Nexus Water, Food and Energy last year at the COP, but also the experience we are currently implementing in the context of the Just Energy Transition platform for North Macedonia. Couple of elements. Clearly, there is a degree of customization or diversity in all these platforms. At the same time, you can identify common patterns and trends that emerge and are quite clear. The first one, I think, has been mentioned: country ownership and country leadership. This is key. This requires, of course, strong leaders, the identification of champions within the government and the relevant institutions, but also the ability to build and develop the existing ecosystem of policies and activities happening in the country. Again, I want to be specific. Let's look at the case of Egypt. Last year, together with several partners in this room, we supported the government, launched the energy pillar of the Nexus Food, Water and Energy that entailed the closure of fossil fuel assets, the investment in grid development, but also a big component of renewable energy development. Now, all this work was not really starting spontaneously, but ultimately built on several years of engagement on building the renewable energy markets. Together with our partners, we developed the regulation and the standards for supporting renewable energy that led to the implementation of the largest solar PV plants in Africa. There's been work on the hydrogen strategy, low carbon pathways in industries. So all this created a fertile ground, and also the language, if you like, to engage with government, local institutions, sector associations, and help developing the momentum for the platform. It's also important to be opportunistic sometimes. In the case of some of these platforms, there are elements that are critical to trigger a shift in approach and urgency with the government institutions. In the case of Egypt, it was the COP. Ultimately, there was a strong impetus to present something meaningful and material at the COP. In the case of North Macedonia, is the possibility to access funding from the Clean Investment, Climate Investment Fund for supporting the closure of the fossil fuel assets. We are now currently working also in the potential development of the platform for industrial decarbonization in Turkey. There, the external internal driver are the emergence of a legislation like the CBAM, the EU CBAM, that clearly creates strong incentives for the local industry to decarbonize, but also very much the high-level policy strategy and objective of the country. The country has announced the net zero objective by 2053, and so this, of course, percolating across all sectors. What is important in this context is also to develop a very strong narrative that combines elements of political economy with strong links to economic development and climate strategy. We believe that what MDBs can do is really to facilitate this process and coordinate the different parties to come with actionable and realistic roadmaps of investments in policy interventions. Maybe one element that we have observed in the development and implementation of these platforms is the fact that ultimately it's important to set realistic and achievable objectives that build on a strong assessment of of investment needs and expected outcomes. The theory behind is also that the role of the MDBs in facilitating this process is actually temporary and evolving. So the idea is that once you achieve technological, let's say, convergence on what are the technological solutions that can lead to decarbonization, and also when there is a clarity on the policy signals and the market signals, ultimately the expectation is the private sector takes over and complete the process. And we need to work on identifying and supporting the trigger points that really creates irreversible shifts in the market. Maybe let me touch briefly upon the process. Data has been mentioned, the role of analytics, very, very important. And the MDBs can provide the body of knowledge, but it's also important to work on scenario analysis. I think that's what, in our experiences, triggers a lot of changes. If you allow me, Josue, a couple of elements on complexity and challenges, because we're talking about all the good stories, but there are also a number of challenges we're facing. One is how to integrate adaptation in this country platform. It's not simple, it's very difficult, and this is something we're working on and we want to do more. The second one is asymmetries in, this platform are designed for private sector mobilization, but also to allow the integration of funding, co-finance from donors and from international institutions. And there is an issue of asymmetry in expectations and objectives that often are difficult to, let's say, combine. And maybe the final point is also competing objectives at the country level. So the idea to create a convergence in, between economic development and climate policy becomes critical for bringing everybody along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giampiero. So I take note of this word asymmetry, which I have to understand better what you mean by that. Yeah. But anyway, thank you. And so I think for everybody, I hope you see the trip that we're trying to do together, right? The analytics, the setting of the goals, directions, what are we trying to achieve through. And now I think I move to the next step that we had, the next color on the palette, which is really the notion that Rahul mentioned on investment plans, on investment programs, and very much also back to what Sunga mentioned, which was really at the end of the day, how do we shift, if you want, from an approach that is project by project to an approach which really tries to take a sector, a theme, or sometimes even multi-sector, and really try to define the investment program that will support the changes and the transformation that is being pursued. So to cover that very simple topic, not so simple, may I invite Seleha Lockwood from the AIIB to cover that topic. And Seleha, just for you to know everything, is the Senior Climate Strategy and Policy Specialist at the AIIB. Seleha, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. So Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is coming to this topic from a unique perspective because it's our core work is infrastructure. So it's mitigation and adaptation and resilience are really critical in this space, and it's both the solution and the area in which we need to make sure that we're addressing the impacts of climate change. I was going to just speak after I thought that we're not going to show my slides, but now that the slides, I'll go go through what I wanted to say just in 3 short slides. One is that we have an approach in which we put a direction on vis-a-vis a climate action plan that was released in September this year. And from that, we've tried to set out certain themes for this COP. And this event really speaks quite significantly to one of the main 3 pillars. One is strong partnerships, which the other people on the panel have also mentioned. And within that is the importance of mobilization, and then supporting country, regional, global level platforms, which are country led. And I've circled that in our first pillar there, which comes from the 4 principles that we have within the climate action plan. And the other core aspect is a holistic approach. So not only looking at mitigation, adaptation and resilience, but also biodiversity and nature. And as Rahul was saying, we need to be thinking about maximizing co-benefits. That is something that we've also emphasized and we continue to focus on. And finally, innovation, both in the financing instruments that we on the table when we're discussing with countries as well about what we could do in infrastructure investments, but also in terms of technology. And you'll see we have quite a significant focus on that. So we're trying to come to the table with technology solutions. Now, here in the what I wanted to bring to the table is a particular example of engagement with a country which we've been trying to do more programmatically, and that's Cambodia. We have engaged over a year with the investment operations team focused on infrastructure. And it's the country that came back to us with a specific program, was prepared by them with 3 priority areas, not only just one sector, but 3 different sectors. And out of that, a specific pipeline of projects came through. So that's, as you mentioned on the slide, you can see water, transport, and urban. And what we're doing now is that we are building on that work we've done with a new program on climate resilience, and that is with another development partners. So that's where I wanted to share some final lessons learned. We've had other MDBs that have probably maybe worked in this area much more than us, but what I've tried to do is make sure that we come with what we are observing with engagement with countries. One is that, again, this is a critical aspect here. It's a core point about success of country platforms. It really must be country led and owned. And then, of course, there's the alignment as well that we can work with countries on NDCs, NAPs, long-term strategies. And often we come back constantly to the need for policy-based financing for climate. So I see that as an important aspect, especially with fiscal space being a challenge in the current macro scenario. And that's where it's interesting to see right now, as Naida is in the audience from ADB, who will point to, there's the Bangladesh pavilion. There's actually the Bangladesh country approach being put forward on a principles basis. And they're putting it forward as a discussion point. And that's where we see the importance of the country leading on coordination and setting up a specific structure. They have a project preparation pillar, mobilizing a finance pillar, knowledge and capacity building, and also measuring metrics as well, outcomes. So second is MDBs need to coordinate and collaborate better. And so I just really think this is a critical point. That's why it's in the middle, because I think that one of the feedbacks that we get from countries is all of us MDBs need to make sure that when we're working together side by side, we also don't overburden countries with doubling up on perhaps taking different approaches. Oops, what's happened here? What happened? Okay, different approaches, and this is where I think it's important that we try to be pragmatic and we work better together amongst the MDBs. So, for instance, us co-financing with other MDBs, accepting that certain standards are done. And then, sorry, Joshua, final point, which I think is the only, is a very critical point, is countries sharing amongst each other and us as MDBs facilitating that. And I think it points to a lot of what both Rahul and Jhunpa have said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Selab. So we continue our trip, but now because the trip is so long, we actually need to change panels, right? So it's almost like changing the engine. So thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you also, Dr. Iqbal, for your introduction. And while I call the next members of panel number 2, I'll introduce them for you. So over there, right now, he took his glasses off, so things are getting serious, is Graham Watkins. And Graham works at the Inter-American Development Bank, right? And is the chief of the Climate Change Division. In the middle, you have Noel O'Brien, who is the director of climate change in the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department at the Asian Development Bank. And then very close to me is Alam Dorsuma, who is the acting director of the Climate Change and Green Department and manager of the Climate and Green Growth activity at the African Development Bank. So one of the things we wanted to do also in this event was to show you one, I would say, the work that goes under this notion of a platform, but also to show that the concept ought to be a concept that's adaptable to a very broad range of topics, right? And one of the things for those of you who have followed, JETPs, you can see that, by definition, a JETP is very much oriented to the energy transition. And one of the points that the MDBs are working on is essentially to broaden the applicability, of this platform approach to, in a way, a broad set of topics that are essentially embedded, in the climate, in addressing the climate challenge. So I will first turn to Noel because I see it was just mentioned by Seleha actually. The Asian Development, I think, has been working for quite a period now with Bangladesh in particular, and I think that provides a very interesting place to understand what a platform approach could do in the context of a country like Bangladesh, where, as you all know, the adaptation issues are, very significant. So, Noel, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear? Thanks, Joshua, and thanks for inviting ADB to be part of the panel. Let me just to begin by indicating that this event is happening at the same time as the event from Bangladesh, where they are presenting their platform. There was a discussion about launching, but it's still at the presentation stage just now. So colleagues are with that effort. So we'll focus in, as Joshua said, on the Bangladesh. So one of the things is the actual context in Bangladesh is that it has the Delta Plan up to 2100, but it also has a substantial national adaptation plan out to 2050. So the kind of figures that are indicated for the 2050 is the need for about 240 billion US dollars to deliver that by 2050. But just in today's meeting, they've announced that that would need about, because that rate works out at 6 billion. But in the event happening over there, they've just indicated that they look at that figure now as in the range of about $11 billion per year if they are to make that adaptation effort happen. So in terms of what's been happening within Bangladesh, there are three policy-based lending initiatives: the World Bank, the IMF, and ADB. And included in one of those policy initiatives is the actual policy instrument for the establishment of Bangladesh's country climate and development platform partnership is the word, the BCDP. And so obviously that is policy action is there to make that happen, together with a suite of reforms which are anticipated to help unlock the capital that is going to be required to implement that national adaptation plan. And our colleague from AIIB already mentioned this, and that we see this context within the project preparation facility for adaptation investments being part of it, a lot of capacity development, but also a monitoring, evaluation, and learning component. So that is an iterative process going forward. The expectation is that with this kind of overall policy context, with the institutional arrangements in place, we believe that it can contribute to that increased in adaptation investment. In parallel, our team started about 18 months ago doing a lot more work on converting adaptation plans into investment plans. So in the context of Bangladesh, we have detailed work going on with the agriculture, natural resource components of the NAP, with ministries of agriculture, ministries of finance, planning, and climate agencies to help convert that into an investment pipeline. And so we see that as an investment pipeline that is not just for Bangladesh, it's also a pipeline for other MDBs, and particularly for ADB. We see that as helping us shift our pipeline for achieving our 100 billion that we have set out at ADB. We have a technical assistance grant financing that will support Bangladesh with the platform, capacity development, institutional arrangements, and the other needs that will be needed to take that forward. So thanks, Joshua. Happy to take other questions later.
Thank you very much, Noel. So we discussed in the first panel the question of the design, of the investment program for mitigation, and I think it's very interesting to note, the work that the African Development Bank is doing. In particular, I would say on the adaptation front, given the challenges that many African countries confront, in this area. It would be very interesting to hear from you, Alamdou, how is the African Development Bank approaching this issue in terms of formulation of investment requirements for adaptation in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josue. As a way of introduction, let me first say that the country level is the right level of climate action, and I think we have chosen the right action level when focusing on countries. I'm saying that because as MDBs, we already work at country level. We co-finance projects together, but we know that certainly we need to do more on various sectors when it comes to addressing climate change. And when we look at African countries, and we have already, we did some analytics on the NDCs in Africa, what we realize is that 20% of the commitments African countries made are unconditional, meaning they are going to implement them with their own resources. But the large part of the commitments, about 80%, have to be supported through, mobilizing external resources and support. So, and most of the actions that are conditional are on adaptation. So, and adaptation being the priority of African countries when it comes to addressing climate change. So let me give you maybe 3 examples of investment programs we have just started recently in Africa. Like EBRD, last year we have supported also Egypt to conceptualize and develop their the program, the NOAFI program, the nexus between water, food, and energy program. We have committed 1.3 billion for the water sector. Actually, we took the lead on the water sector, and it's not just water, but water linked to energy. Actually, our support is to invest more on, water desalination using renewable energy. So we have chosen that particular angle. And we also know that last year, when some countries have engaged in the JETP, South Africa, one of our key member countries, has also approached us, and we are also supporting South Africa on the JETP. That's largely mitigation. Now, on adaptation, we have two key initiatives. The Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, a program that we launched 2 years ago together with the Global Center on Adaptation. It's a 25 billion program. Half of it is being provided by the bank. The rest is to be mobilized through partnerships. And we have put in place a mechanism whereby there is an upstream facility that helps prepare projects, make them ready for investment. And there is a downstream facility that helps support the implementation of those investment programs. So with the upstream facility, the bank, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, has been able to support already 46 investment projects in 36 countries. So those projects have been prepared, analytics have been done, they are now ready for investment. Now we are coming with our downstream facility. And last year, you may recall that we launched an initiative called the Interconnection Window, which is going to serve as a downstream facility to finance those projects that have been prepared through the upstream facility. So there are already several investment programs there in many countries, just waiting for support by us through the climate action window. But we are also calling on other partners, especially MDBs, to come and support those remaining programs that are in this platform or this framework. It's a framework. And the good thing is that the AAAP, we call it like that, Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, is being now seen as an example that could be replicated in other continents. I know that Asia is interested, and recently several partners have joined us. We know that World Bank has also approached us to join the platform, the Agence Française de Développement as well. We also do have UNDP and other development partners ready to support that. So it's an innovative tool. It's a platform that will help strengthen adaptation action at regional level, but most importantly at country level. The last example I want to give is a new one that we launched recently at the Africa Climate Summit in September this year. We call it Country Adaptation Investment Compacts. And these are really country-led and country-focused adaptation programs. We have started with 7 countries, including Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, Mozambique, Senegal. They have launched the compacts this year in September. And now what we are doing is to work at country level through the donor community to bring together development partners, including MDBs, to support those adaptation compacts. These compacts are actually, we started doing analytics first. What is the level of vulnerability at the country level? What are the key vulnerable sectors at country level? And what are the investment opportunities? And what are also the financial mechanisms to support those investment opportunities? And I think as I speak, we are engaging already countries like in Kenya, Tanzania, Senegal, and Mozambique. We are already working with partners at country level, including MDBs, to finance those investment programs. And to conclude, I think that these are examples of, and we have just started. We need more to do more, and we cannot do that alone. And being that AFDB and other MDBs are working at country level in those countries, it's a unique opportunity for us to support such country platforms. one important thing I want to say before I give you back the floor is that, it's good we are talking about country sector platforms, but from our experience, we see that this might become country multi-sectoral platforms, because in one particular program, you may find 2 or 3 different sectors. And how do you create the links between those sectors in order to maximize climate impacts? For me, that would be something that we need to consider moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alamdo. So we'll have to add S after sector.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think really the key point here is really to mention that it really is, I would say, the country at the end that has to determine that. And it goes back into this notion of priority that, the analytics show what the range of issues are. The country, in a way, together with you, together, with other partners, decides, how much to tackle upfront, right? And in certain cases, maybe it may be 2 or 3 because of the interlinkages. In other cases, maybe it may be more sequenced over time, particularly because implementation always needs to be tested,
Absolutely.
on the ground. So speaking of implementation, let me turn now to Graham, because if we continue to go in our color palette, once we have defined, these investment programs, whether they're in mitigation, adaptation, on both multi-sector, single sector, financing comes, into question. I think previous speakers have mentioned, obviously, public-private mobilization, but I understand that the Inter-American Development Bank has been really working on quite a range of, I would say, innovative financing instruments that they're bringing, particularly sometimes to address areas in which I would say the revenue flows may not always be, completely obvious, to figure out, but where you seem to be finding solutions that are very interesting. So, Graham, could you share some of these with us?
I'll try to. Hopefully, you can hear me. I wanted to start by saying why the Inter-American Development Bank Group's interested in this agenda. And one of the reasons is that G20 is about to shift from India to Brazil. So that we're about to get the agenda. And today we took over the MDB heads coordination. So that kind of puts us in right in the firing line, not just of country platforms, but of MD reform in general. I would also, I'd also say that there's actually a lot of action already going on the ground in Latin America and the Caribbean with respect to country platforms. That ranges from joint work that we've done for the last 10, 15 years on the CIFs, the Climate Investment Funds, amongst other programs. We jointly lend with the EIB, with AFD, with other groups, KfW, directly in investments in countries where we actually do projects together directly. And we recently signed agreements with the World Bank, basically looking at climate resilience and disasters in the Caribbean, looking at the Amazon as a major focus area, and also looking at digitalization, which also has implications. But probably most importantly, there are a lot of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that are already doing country platforms in de facto. And I've got Colombia sitting in front of me as one example, but there are numerous countries that are already doing this. They're already thinking about climate and development, and they're already trying to set up the frameworks for action, the long-term strategies, all the way down to the investment plans, even to thinking about costs and benefits of doing this. Amongst them, Costa Rica, Chile, Uruguay, the Dominican Republic, Colombia, and Barbados as examples. But so there's a lot of movement already in this direction. I'm going to quickly go through 3 groups of different types of instruments that we think are highly relevant to the agenda. The first one is basically technical assistance and policy lending. It's a bit of a no-brainer, and I think we've already covered it to some extent. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the CCDRs are super important inputs. We could work more and more together on those. We already have, in the case of Peru, the case of Brazil, there was a lot of interaction into developing those. But that kind of knowledge input in general is a strength of the banks in terms of providing technical assistance to countries so that they can actually have the information and knowledge to be able to take decisions. So that kind of support is crucial. but it's even more crucial when you connect that to programmatic policy lending. So not just a one-off policy loan, but a series of policy loans that can help to move people in the right direction. As Sarah had mentioned this as well, in terms of what we really need to be thinking about. And if these policy loans can be connected back to the long-term strategies that were mentioned at the beginning, then I think that we're starting to get on the right course with respect to that. There are some evolutions in policy lending that we're experimenting with as well. Even though the debt for nature conversions, the guarantees for debt for nature conversions that we've been doing and already announced in Barbados and Ecuador don't look like policy loans, they actually are policy loans in some sense. They're guarantees for policies, basically. So you need to develop the policies that are aligned with your broader planning, and then we track whether or not you deliver those policies over time. We're also working with the IMF, with the Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund, to look at how we can actually move that agenda forward too. In this case, the IMF is providing the financing, but we actually do the technical assistance work to try and move the agenda forward. And much of that agenda is actually around how do you create the enabling conditions for private investment in countries. And we've done that in looking at that in Barbados, Costa Rica, and Jamaica so far, and we just began to think about that in Paraguay. So I think this concept of having the clarity, leadership from the country knows what it's trying to do, has that designed in long-term strategies and NDCs, investment plans, and has already understood the costs and benefits of that. That's a base that the MDBs can help with, and we have the existing instruments to be able to do that. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, because the next phase of this is the investments themselves. So I'm not going to go into all of the different kinds of investments. And again, it's a bit of a no-brainer that you would align your investments to those plans. But one area that we're also going to be talking a lot about at COP, and we have a separate session on it, is something we're calling Bid Klima, which is basically an effort to support countries with this agenda, but also to reduce costs of capital for these kinds of investments that are aligned with achieving the agenda. So it's actually, we're doing a pilot across 10 countries. We're going to be talking, we have a session where we'll talk with the countries about the pilot. We'll reduce the cost of capital by about 5% in each of the cases in direct investments. But this is connected to 3 different kinds of indicators. The first indicator is the standard one where you're looking at performance and delivery of results that are in the NDCs, that can be in NDSAPs, that can be in NAPs directly. That's the easiest indicator. The other indicators, one of them is related to governance, to the transversality within government, to making sure ministries of finance are working with ministries of environment and with the sector directly. And the third one we also discussed a little bit earlier is about MRVs, about actually having the capacity to monitor important results. This is an experiment. We're trying to see whether or not it'll work. If it works, it could be large. We're going to allocate $1 billion of ordinary capital to the agenda to move it forward. And we've already found the funding to be able to support the reduction in the cost of capital and the technical assistance that's going to be required to help countries where they need help to be able to build the capacity. I wanted to come back to a point Gianpetro also mentioned about, where's adaptation and all of this, and not forget that we have traditional historical instruments, things that we call contingent credit facilities, for example, that we've had for a very long time. And what we're looking at there is how do we enhance those? How do we think about the expansion of those over time? And we'll have another session with the UK on climate and disaster risk clauses in contracts, which are connected directly to the contingent credit facilities from a triggering perspective. So we're also looking at those kinds of questions as well to be able to advance the agenda. And I don't want to take up a huge amount of time because you can also go to all the other sessions on all of these issues. But I do think it's important that we look at the suite of instruments that we have and move the agenda forward. And in some, I want to repeat that earlier message. We do have the experience of working together. The climate investment funds are an example of where basically MDBs should be working together and collaborating in countries. We have a lot of work already on the ground, at least in Latin America and the Caribbean, where the planning, the structuring, the investment planning, the thinking about costs and benefits is already in place. So really it's about aligning to that. And there I think, and I want to finish with this, The IDB group is also restructuring its whole institutional strategy. And in its institutional strategy, it's doing what the World Bank has done, which is incorporate basically global public goods, biodiversity, and climate as a direct goal. Once you do that, that's going to filter down into the country strategies, and then the country strategies are going to be aligned to what the country actually wants in those areas. And I think that that's a very important step forward in terms of moving the agenda forward. And I think it's really what the MDB reform group was trying to get at when they talk about country platforms, but they also talk about the triple agenda at the higher level. So I'll stop there. I think there's just a whole lot of information, a lot going on, but thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Graham. So I hope that particularly I'm thankful, Graham, that you mentioned also the word outcomes and impacts, you know, and, because that's obviously the other part that we haven't really talked about, but I think is also a very important element in this discussion on platforms, because if we put a focus, you know, if the countries and the MDBs put a focus on the specification of the goals and particular targets, you know, you have to look at the other side, you know, of this in terms of, you know, what's actually happened. And I feel, at least now, not being in an MDB, that there is an increasing focus, you know, on this verification of outcomes, and also of looking actually at the impact and shifting from what the discussion between the MDBs and sometimes their shareholders has been in the past, which was, you know, please put another few billions, or please increase, you know, the ratio of climate finance from X to X plus X prime, right? And I think that that hopefully is one also of the intentions, you know, behind this work on country platform, is really to change, you know, the nature, you know, the content of the discussion towards actually linking that to the real nature of the issues in the countries and to the real scale of these, right? Because when you do the analytics, when you define an investment program, that's what you're doing. You know, you're kind of, you know, setting what the scale is. And perhaps just one mini thing, which I hope you mentioned, firing line. I think perhaps more is to say that the topic, you know, is on the podium or in the limelight, and that to a certain extent, you know, the session that we're having today is to a certain extent, I would say, development of the work of the MDBs, given, you know, this increased attention, and let's say it also given this increased pressure, you know, to do more. We have a few minutes for questions. So if there are any questions, we have here our panel, I think, right, ready to answer. Yes, sir. And then we'll hear.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Vincent Danner from the EBRD. I work a lot with local banks, and I was wondering, in the context of the country platform you mentioned in Bangladesh or in Africa, what's your view on the role of local banks? Have they shown an interest in participating in this platform? Do you have any view in terms of where you see the role of these local banks? It'd be quite interesting to hear your view. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Audrey Cynthia from the African Development Bank Group. I have actually two questions. The first one is we really understand the importance of these country sector platforms, definitely. What are we going to do on the regional, as a regional platform, because they are common issue, especially on climate change work concerning multiple countries. And how do we work on cross-border integration subjects, especially on climate? So we need as well those kind of cross-bordering pipelines and information, especially for region. So this is my first point. The second is about the fundings. It's always the elephant in the room. Because I think in terms of how is it structured and the thematic cover is really important and deep. But the level also of resources which will be needed to do this work is quite important. So the question, how are we going to mobilize the resources, the adequate resources, especially in this context where we have also many other initiatives and topics to cover. Thank you very much.
Any other question? Okay, so I will not allocate, but I will leave your individual enthusiasm to. Would you like to say something?
Let me start with the question on local banks. Actually, I thought my colleague Audrey was going to respond to that question because currently she's leading an initiative at the African Development Bank called African Green Banks Initiatives. And the objective of the initiative is actually to support local banks to develop their own investment strategies and identify a pipeline of green projects in which they could invest or mobilize resources to invest in. So we have already started with a few countries. I think Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Morocco, and Egypt. These are local banks in those countries. So it's in Benin, I think it's a Caisse de dépôt et de consignation, and an investment bank of Cote d'Ivoire is also involved in that program. So we are working with them already. But of course, I think it's just a beginning. It's something we want to scale up. So this initiative is going to grow in the future. And again, I believe this is another area where MDBs could work together depending on the country priorities of the local banks themselves, and our own priorities, of course.
Thank you, Alam. Graham, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and answer all three questions at the same time. On the local banks question, we just announced the creation of a green coalition of banks for the Amazon. So yes, absolutely. And so we're trying to bring in the national development banks and other banks into the same framework of action within countries. Regional approaches, absolutely, hence the Amazon. But the Amazon is not the only one that we're doing regionally because we've got shared issues. But Central America for resilience and agriculture, we're also working closely with Costa Rica. We're leading a program to move that agenda forward for Central America. And we're also going to announce at COP an approach for the Caribbean as well, which again, you have shared problems, shared challenges, very similar challenges in each of those countries. So therefore, you need to try and address the challenges regionally. On the resource availability question, yes, just like everybody else, we're looking at mobilization. We're looking at the questions of private sector engagement to advance the agenda. If we look again at the response to MDB reform, we're going to try and get a capital increase for our private sector arm. The base of that capital increase is actually originate to share. So it's actually not about focusing on how much we invest, but it's about creating enabling circumstances so that we can bring in and crowd in private capital into our own investments, where we do a lot of the structuring work, move the agenda forward. So I think that's another issue. But the same as other banks, we're also working on the question of capital adequacy to be able to draw in more capital ourselves. We've estimated that we can probably bring in 2 billion on top of the 15 billion that we do every year just from capital adequacy changes, reform changes. And just like ADB and other banks, we're looking at the question of guarantees. So tertiary guarantees that can also then bring in additional financing. In our long-term financial planning, we've thought about whether or not we can increase from 15 billion to 20 billion as a starting point to move the agenda forward. And I think if you look at the MDB reform thing, it also talks about capital increases, not just for the private sector, but the public sector as well. So different mechanisms to try and draw in more capital as we move forward. Not forgetting that we also still need to have that base of concessional finance to drive transformation as well. So,
thank you. Noel, would you like to add anything?
Just from the regional side for ADB, just 3 regional entities alone. The Central Asia CARIC is one of the regional entities, and then obviously the Greater Mekong sub-region, which has been active, and then within the ASEAN context itself. So I think there's a number of platforms for operations there. I mean, in terms of the funding perspective, just a couple of areas. Obviously, one is that what I talked about, the investment planning, that shifting the pipeline is obviously critical for us. That allows us to direct that greater portion of ADB's own investments into a climate finance, a legitimate climate finance. So that's critical for us on upstream engagement across the entire ADB portfolio. Just following on from we've already completed the capital adequacy increase That adds for ADB almost 10 billion per annum lending. That would take our portfolio from the range of 24 billion to 33 to 35 billion. So very substantial that we shift that pipeline so we can make sure that that increased lending is in the climate area. We have already proceeded establishing the IFTAP fund. So those are areas for us on that increased funding. And then I think the other dimension is on the obviously the MDBs working together. So that pipeline of MDB investment, future policy investments are starting to reiterate that. The other aspect we're doing more work on in the adaptation space is on climate resilient fiscal planning, where we have initiatives with Indonesia, Mongolia, and Armenia already. And that's helping work with the ministries of finance direct, obviously, and that would also have a link with domestic resource mobilization. And we're working now with the Council of Finance Ministers. So that that agenda shifts also not just from the mitigation space to the adaptation space. And there's event, I think, to the 5th or the 6th, looking at that here with the Council of Finance Ministers. So those are a couple of areas, Joshua.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I think from these answers, you can see that, a lot of the work and a lot of the background, to the topic that we're discussing is actually very much embedded in this MDB reform work. Your question was particularly on capital and resources. Clearly, that's one element, right? I think Graham mentioned the element of concessional, that to a certain extent that is going to be also very important for certain types of issues. And it's clear that the funding structure of each of the platforms will certainly change depending on country and type of activity that it is trying to deal with. I think for those of you who are interested in these macro financial issues, I think it's on the 4th of December. There is going to be the launch at noon, I think, of the second volume of the Finance for Climate Action report. And that actually goes really into the macro numbers. So get used to trillions and hundreds of billions, right? But it's useful in the sense that it does give a big frame within which you can see, the expanded role of the MDBs, right? So it does provide, I would say, a roadmap with numbers, that is relevant. So I think with this, I can turn to first say thank you to our panelists on panel 2. Thank you very much. And also to those on panel 1, also not to be forgotten. I hope that this session did provide you with at least some element and some description of each of the colors on that palette that were described. And again, for those of you who may become hooked on this topic, there is going to be a second event on this topic, so-called high-level event, which will include, I think, the presidents of the AIIP and the EBRD on the 3rd of December at 6:30. So with that, thank you very much, and have a good continuation of your day at COP28. Thank you.